Once sealed, it was closed forever. Or at least that was the plan. The rituals, spells, and imagery were originally placed outside or in nearby temples. The pyramid itself was a cosmic object, not a gallery. Think less museum, more sealed server room for the soul. Now, inevitably, someone always says, but what about the alignment? The pyramids are aligned extremely closely with true north. No, that does not mean aliens. It means ancient Egyptians were very good at observing stars. They used circumpolar stars, stars that never set, to orient structures. These stars symbolized eternity. Again, everything comes back to not dying properly. Let's pause here because this is where modern speculation usually explodes. People say, they're too precise. They're too old. They couldn't have done this. But they could. And they did. Slowly. Methodically. Over decades. No lasers. No levitation. Just ramps, sledges, water, manpower, and patience. An unreasonable amount of patience. Which honestly is more impressive than aliens. Now, while Khufu gets all the attention, he wasn't alone. His son Khafre built the second pyramid. Slightly smaller. Sits on higher ground. Looks taller. Classic younger sibling move. Khafre also likely commissioned the Great Sphinx of Giza. A massive lion body, human head statue staring east. Possibly his face. Possibly symbolic. No, it's not guarding secret libraries. It's probably just him. Watching forever. Because ego is also eternal. Then there's Menkaure, with the smallest pyramid of the three. Still massive. Still absurd. Just slightly less. By this point, the pyramid tradition was already shifting. Resources were tighter. Beliefs were evolving. And future kings would choose smaller pyramids. Or abandon them altogether. Which tells us something important. If pyramids were power plants. Or alien beacons. Or secret global energy nodes. They wouldn't stop. But they did. Because pyramids were tied to a specific religious moment. A very specific idea about kingship and the afterlife. When beliefs changed, architecture changed. Simple. Human. A little disappointing if you wanted lasers. So let's slow down here. The real purpose of the pyramids wasn't mystery. It was reassurance. Reassurance that the king would rise again. That order would continue. That chaos would stay buried. That the universe would behave. They were stone promises. And the reason we still argue about them is because they worked. They lasted. They outlived empires, religions, languages, and the people who built them. And now they sit there. Silent. While we project our own questions onto them. The real purpose of the pyramids, or why everyone keeps guessing wrong. Hey guys. Tonight, go ahead and dim the lights. Lower the volume just a little. Get comfortable in whatever position your spine has decided is acceptable for the next hour and a half. Because tonight we're drifting back. Very slowly. About 4,500 years. To a hot, sandy place where people had unlimited time, unlimited stone, and an absolutely unreasonable amount of confidence. Tonight we're talking about the pyramids. And no, not aliens. Not secret power plants. Not ancient Wi-Fi routers for the gods. Just humans. Tired, organized, deeply religious humans. Who really did not want to be forgotten. So let's settle in. If you've ever seen a picture of the pyramids, and of course you have, they're on everything from textbooks to energy drink cans. You've probably had the same thought every human has had for centuries. Okay, but why? Why are they so big? Why are they so precise? Why triangles? Why here? Why stack millions of stones instead of, I don't know, building something slightly less exhausting? And more importantly, why are we still arguing about it? The short answer is, because the pyramids are quiet. They don't explain themselves. They just sit there judging us. So tonight we're going to take the long way around that question. The slow, boring, extremely human way. Let's gently float back to ancient Egypt. Not the movie version. Not the alien version. The real one. Picture a narrow strip of green hugging the Nile River, surrounded by endless desert. The Nile floods, then retreats, every year. Like clockwork. This predictability made Egyptians feel something very dangerous for a civilization. Secure. They believed the universe itself was orderly, that life, death, and rebirth followed rules, and that if you followed those rules properly, you could keep existing forever. Which brings us to the pyramids. Now, before we even touch a stone, we need to talk about death. Because ancient Egypt was obsessed with it. Not in a spooky way. More in a meticulous planner who color codes their calendar way. To Egyptians, death wasn't the end. It was a transition. Like switching rooms. But, and this is important, you could only make that transition if everything went exactly right. Your body needed to survive. Your name needed to be remembered. Your soul needed directions. And your status needed to remain very obvious. Otherwise you were done. Cosmically speaking. So naturally, if you were king, you didn't want to risk messing that up. Let's pause gently with our first royal character. Enter Khufu. Also known as Cheops. Depending on who's translating and how dramatic they're feeling. Khufu ruled during Egypt's 4th dynasty, around 2580 BCE. He inherited a kingdom that was wealthy, stable, and extremely good at stacking rocks. And Khufu had a problem. He was a god king, literally divine, but also very mortal. Which meant one day he would die. And if his afterlife setup wasn't flawless, his soul could wander, starve, or just sort of fade out. No pressure. So Khufu did what any all-powerful ruler would do. He built the largest stone structure humanity had ever attempted. 'Cause of course he did. The Great Pyramid of Giza, Khufu's pyramid, is not subtle. It's not humble, doesn't whisper, announces. At its peak, it stood about 146 meters tall. Over 2 million stone blocks, each weighing roughly as much as a small car. Placed with precision that still makes modern engineers quietly sigh. No, it wasn't built by slaves whipped into submission. That's a myth. A very persistent, very dramatic myth. The people who built the pyramids were paid workers. Farmers mostly. Seasonal laborers who couldn't farm when the Nile flooded. They were fed. Housed. Organized. They left behind graffiti like Friends of Khufu and Drunkards of Menkaure, which is honestly adorable. Nothing says, eternal monument like ancient construction crew humor. So what was the pyramid for? Here's where things get boring. And real. The pyramid was a tomb. That's it. That's the core purpose. But calling it just a tomb is like calling a space station just a shed. It was a resurrection machine. Cosmic launch pad. A giant stone guarantee that the king's soul would climb to the stars and continue ruling forever. Egyptians believed the king's Ka, his life force, needed a physical anchor. That anchor was the preserved body. No body. No afterlife. Which explains the mummification obsession. And the sealed chambers. And the ridiculous effort. Now let's talk shape. Why pyramids? Why not cubes? Or spheres? Or something with less lifting involved? Because pyramids are stable. Extremely stable. Stacking stones inward creates natural strength. No arches required. No advanced metallurgy. It's gravity doing most of the work. Which means pyramids don't collapse easily. And that was kind of the point. Eternity needs good engineering. But there's also symbolism here. The pyramid shape mirrors the Benben, the primordial mound that rose from chaos at the creation of the world. It also resembles rays of sunlight. And guess who was associated with the sun? The king. Always the king. So the pyramid wasn't just practical. It was cosmological branding. Now let's gently wander over to the location. Why Giza? Why not somewhere cooler? Because Giza sits on the west bank of the Nile. And west, in Egyptian belief, was the land of the dead. The sun sets in the west. The dead go west. It's very tidy. Also, the bedrock there is solid limestone. Good foundation. Minimal sinking. Even the ancients knew you don't want your eternal monument sliding into the earth like a badly placed bookshelf. Now here's where things start getting slightly weird. Inside the pyramid there's no decoration. No hieroglyphs. No scenes of daily life. Just stone. Which confuses people. Later tombs were covered in art. So why is Khufu's pyramid basically empty? Because the pyramid wasn't meant to be visited. Ever. In the next part, we'll drift away from stone and into symbolism. How pyramids connected earth, sky, and kingship. And why later cultures completely misunderstood them. No rush. Part 2. Inside the pyramid. Corridors, chambers, and the ancient fear of being robbed forever. Alright, welcome back. If you drifted off a little, that's perfect. If not, that's fine too. Tonight we're gently stepping inside the pyramid. No torches. No curses. No dramatic swelling music. Just stone hallways. Angled passages. And the overwhelming sense that someone really didn't want visitors. Let's imagine very calmly, approaching the Great Pyramid again. From the outside it's smooth. Or at least it used to be. Polished limestone casing stones, reflecting sunlight so brightly it may have been visible for miles. Basically a giant glowing triangle saying, yes, the king is dead. Yes, he's still important. Please remember that. There was one entrance. High up. Carefully sealed. And that alone should tell you something. The pyramid was not designed for convenience. It was designed for permanence. And paranoia. Now, once inside, things immediately get weird. Instead of a straight path to a burial chamber, you're sent down. A descending passage. Narrow. Deep. Claustrophobic. It slopes into the bedrock beneath the pyramid. This leads to what's often called the subterranean chamber. And here's the funny thing. It's unfinished. Rough cut. Uneven. Almost abandoned. which has confused people for centuries. Why start carving a chamber and then just stop? The most likely answer is also the most boring one. Plans changed. Kings changed their minds. Architects revised layouts. Deadlines shifted. Even divine rulers apparently said, "Actually, let's do something else." So this chamber was likely an early idea, backup plan, or just the architectural equivalent of a rough draft. And then they moved on. Now let's gently back up. Because halfway along that descending passage, there's a turn. A narrow corridor going up. This is the ascending passage. Already you can feel the intent. Confuse anyone who gets inside. Force them to crawl. Make them sweat. Because grave robbers were a real problem. Kings knew it. Architects knew it. Everyone knew it. And nothing ruins eternity like someone stealing your organs and gold. The ascending passage leads into something unexpectedly elegant. The Grand Gallery. Symmetrical. Feels ceremonial. Almost theatrical. Which is interesting because no ceremonies happened here. This space wasn't meant for priests or mourners. It was meant for the king's spirit. The geometry matters. The angles matter. The feeling matters. It's architecture doing spiritual heavy lifting. At the end of the Grand Gallery, things split again. One small passage leads to the Queen's chamber, which, despite the name, was not for a queen. Egyptologists love a confusing label. This chamber likely housed a statue of the king. Backup body. Just in case. Because if your mummy was damaged, your soul needed options. That's not superstition. That's contingency planning. The Queen's chamber has narrow shafts extending outward. Not wide enough for people. Not wide enough for air. For a long time people thought they were ventilation shafts. They're not. They're symbolic. They point toward specific stars associated with rebirth and the afterlife. Again, everything leads upward. Now, if you go past the Queen's chamber and continue upward, you reach the most famous space. The King's chamber. Simple. Rectangular. Made of granite. No decoration. No inscriptions. Just a stone sarcophagus. And that emptiness drives people wild. Because surely something this important should be dramatic. But it isn't. The drama happened in the rituals, not the room. Above the king's chamber are relieving chambers. 5 of them. Stacked layers of stone meant to redistribute weight. Because even gods don't want ceilings collapsing on them. Inside those chambers, archaeologists found graffiti left by workers, including the name of Khufu himself, which is one of the strongest pieces of evidence that this pyramid really was built for him. No mystery civilization required. Just a lot of limestone and tired backs. Now let's talk traps. Because people expect Indiana Jones. They expect swinging blades, poison darts, crumbling floors. Instead, what they got was confusion, false passages, blocking stones, dead ends. The pyramid's defense system was psychological. Get lost. Get exhausted. Give up. And it worked. For a while. Eventually, grave robbers did break in. Probably not long after Khufu was buried. Gold doesn't stay secret forever. Which is why the sarcophagus is empty. Which is why the king's body is gone. And which is why the pyramid still stands. Because its true purpose wasn't to protect treasure. It was to anchor belief. Here's the part people often miss. The pyramid didn't fail. Even when robbed, it succeeded. Khufu's name endured. His monument endured. His place in cosmic order endured. The afterlife wasn't about objects. It was about memory and structure. And pyramids are excellent at both. Now let's slowly zoom out. Because Khufu's pyramid wasn't unique. It was the peak of a long architectural experiment. Earlier kings built step pyramids. Like the one at Saqqara, built for Djoser. That one looks like a stack of stone platforms. Prototype. Later kings refined the shape. Smoothed the sides. Perfected the geometry. The pyramid was a technology. Not mystical. Iterative. And like all technologies, it evolved. And then became obsolete. So why did pyramids stop being built? Because belief shifted. The afterlife became more accessible. Not just for kings. Texts once reserved for royalty, like the pyramid texts, started appearing in non-royal tombs. Eternity was democratized, which meant kings didn't need mountains anymore. Just nice tombs. And that's kind of beautiful. And also kind of sad. Because the pyramids mark a moment when power, belief, and architecture aligned perfectly. For a brief time, humans truly believed they could build eternity. And they came surprisingly close. Let's slow things down again. Part 3. Stairways to the Sky. Kings, gods, and the quiet geometry of belief. Alright, welcome back. Settle in again. Maybe adjust the pillow. This is the part where things drift upward. Not dramatically, just slowly. Like ancient ideas floating toward the stars. Because once you understand the stone, the corridors, and the very human fear of being robbed for eternity, you start to realize the pyramids weren't just buildings. They were diagrams. They were instructions. They were the ancient equivalent of saying, "This way up." To really understand the pyramids, we need to talk about how ancient Egyptians imagined the universe. And luckily for us, they were very consistent. They believed the cosmos was layered. There was the earth, the sky, the underworld, and the space beyond the stars. Everything had its place. And nothing stayed random for long. At the center of this order stood the king. Always the king. The king wasn't just a ruler. He was a bridge. When alive, he connected humans to gods. When dead, he connected gods back to humans. Which is a lot of responsibility for one guy in a linen skirt. The pyramids were built during a time when kingship was closely tied to the sun god Ra. Ra rose every morning, crossed the sky, died every evening, then traveled through the underworld to be reborn again. Sound familiar? Exactly. The king followed the same path. So when a king died, his soul was expected to rise, join Ra, and continue cycling through existence. The pyramid made that journey easier. The pyramid sides angle upward like frozen rays of sunlight. That wasn't accidental. Egyptian texts describe the king ascending to the heavens, on the rays of the sun. So the pyramid wasn't just symbolic. It was practical theology. A giant stone metaphor you could climb. At least spiritually. Now let's talk stars. Specifically the circumpolar stars. These stars never set. They circle endlessly around the north celestial pole. To Egyptians they represented eternity. No death, no rebirth, just constant presence. And guess where the internal shafts of the Great Pyramid point? Right toward those stars. Not for air, not for escape, for alignment. The king's soul needed a destination. And Egyptians were polite enough to include directions. This is where modern minds sometimes get restless. Because symbolism feels unsatisfying. We want switches, machines, hidden technology. But ancient people didn't separate science and religion the way we do. Astronomy was sacred. Architecture was spiritual. Geometry was theology. Everything overlapped. Which is why the pyramids feel so deliberate. They were. Now let's gently talk about something pyramids did not do. They were not designed to be entered regularly. They were not temples for worship. They were not public monuments. That role belonged to mortuary temples nearby. Priests performed rituals there. Offerings were made. Names were spoken. Because as long as the king's name was spoken, he existed. The pyramid stood silently behind it all. A backup plan carved into the landscape. And this is important. The pyramid wasn't about the living visiting the dead. It was about the dead staying present among the living. Which flips the usual assumption. The pyramid didn't invite you in. It anchored something outward. Over time, Egyptian beliefs evolved. Kings became associated not just with Ra, but with Osiris, the god of death, rebirth, and resurrection. Osiris ruled the afterlife, judged souls, promised renewal. This shift made the afterlife more personal, more moral, and less exclusive, which again meant pyramids weren't necessary anymore. The technology of belief had changed. But for a few centuries, during the Old Kingdom, pyramids were the ultimate expression of royal destiny. They were massive. They were expensive. They were absolute. And they said one thing very clearly. This king is still important. Even now. Let's pause for a second. Think about how much effort went into something no one was meant to see. Millions of stones. Precise alignment. Complex internal planning. All for a sealed chamber. That tells you something profound about ancient Egyptian priorities. Legacy mattered more than experience. Continuity mattered more than comfort. And eternity mattered more than efficiency. Now let's drift away from Egypt for a moment. Because pyramids didn't stay in Egypt. Not physically. But conceptually. Later cultures saw them. Guessed wrong. The Greeks thought pyramids were granaries. The Romans thought they were monuments to arrogance. Medieval travelers thought they were built by giants. Modern conspiracy theorists think they're batteries. Every era projects itself onto them. Because the pyramids refuse to explain themselves. They just exist. And maybe that's why they're so effective. They outlast interpretation. They absorb imagination. They remain a neutral. Which is unsettling. 'Cause we like answers. And pyramids don't care. Let's gently return to the sand. Back to Giza. Part 4. When kings went underground. From giant triangles to quiet valleys. Alright, welcome back again. If your thoughts wandered a bit, that's exactly right. This is the drifting section. Because now we're leaving the age of giant stone statements and sliding gently into an era of subtlety, or at least Egyptian subtlety, which still involves carving entire mountains. By the end of the Old Kingdom, pyramids had started to feel unnecessary. Not useless, just excessive. They were expensive. They attracted attention. And worst of all, they didn't actually stop grave robbers, which, from an ancient king's perspective, is a terrible return on investment. So Egyptian royalty did something very human. They adjusted. The afterlife beliefs shifted again. Kings were no longer expected to blast straight into the sky on sunbeams. Instead, they were expected to journey through the underworld, face judgment, and be reborn like everyone else. Still divine, just less flashy. And this theological downgrade had architectural consequences. Instead of pyramids, kings began carving tombs directly into rock. Hidden, secluded, out of sight. Enter the Valley of the Kings. A dry, isolated valley on the west bank of the Nile, across from Thebes. No giant monuments, no skyline dominance, just cliffs, heat, and secrecy, which was the whole point. These tombs weren't meant to be seen. They were meant to be forgotten, at least physically. Spiritually, the king still lived on through rituals, temples, and names. But his body, that was now tucked away like a precious object you don't trust anyone with. Inside these tombs, something interesting happened. Decoration returned. Walls were covered in texts, spells, maps of the underworld. Because if the soul had to travel, it needed instructions. Very detailed instructions. Ancient Egyptian afterlife guidebooks are not light reading. They include monsters, gates, passwords, and cosmic fairies. Honestly, it's a lot. This tells us something important. The pyramid wasn't abandoned because it failed. It was abandoned because belief evolved. The journey mattered more than the launch. And mountains of stone weren't necessary anymore. Let's gently mention a queen who understood this shift perfectly. Hatshepsut. She ruled as pharaoh during the New Kingdom. Confident, strategic, extremely aware of optics. Her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari is carved into cliffs. It's elegant, balanced, integrated into the landscape, not dominating it. She understood that permanence didn't need height anymore, just harmony. Now let's float forward to someone you definitely know. Tutankhamun. Young, sickly, unremarkable in life, but famous in death. Why? Because his tomb was small, hidden, and forgotten, which meant it wasn't robbed. Irony is very patient. Tutankhamun didn't need a pyramid. He needed obscurity. And thanks to a collapsed staircase and centuries of sand, he got it. His tomb shows us what royal burial should have been like. If grave robbers hadn't existed. Gold, furniture, food, clothing, everything needed for the afterlife. All untouched. And here's the quiet lesson. The most famous pharaoh in the modern world didn't build big. He disappeared quietly, which tells us something uncomfortable about legacy. Sometimes survival beats spectacle. Now take a breath, 'cause we've come full circle. From giant pyramids shouting into the sky, to hidden chambers whispering into eternity. The purpose didn't change. Only the method did. The pyramids were never power plants. Never alien beacons. Never lost technology. They were belief frozen in stone. And when belief changed, so did architecture. Simple. Human. Almost disappointing. Part 5. Why the pyramids still won't let us sleep. Modern obsession, eternal stone, and the need for mystery. Alright, welcome to the last stretch. If your eyes are heavy now, that's perfect timing. This is where things soften, flatten out, and gently come to rest. Because by now we know what the pyramids were for. And yet, we still can't stop arguing about them. Here's the strange thing. The ancient Egyptians were very clear about their beliefs. They left texts, carvings, records. They told us why they built what they built. And still, thousands of years later, we keep saying, yeah, but what if it was something else that tells us more about us than about them? Modern life is loud, fast, temporary. Phones break. Buildings get replaced. Names disappear. So when we see something that refuses to vanish, something that survives empires, religions, wars, and tourism, it makes us uncomfortable, because permanence feels unnatural now. The pyramids don't fit our world. They weren't built for profit. They weren't built for visitors. They weren't built to evolve. They were built to stay. And that's unsettling. So we invent explanations that match our anxieties. Aliens. Lost civilizations. Ancient supertech. Because the idea that humans, slow, superstitious, bureaucratic humans, could plan something this enduring, that's harder to accept. Means we could do things that last. And we usually choose not to. There's also the silence. The pyramids don't perform. They don't glow. They don't activate. They just exist, which is almost rude. They don't reward curiosity with spectacle. They don't react. They let you project whatever you want onto them. Ancient Egyptians didn't care if you understood them. They cared that the universe stayed balanced, that the sun rose, that the Nile flooded, that names were remembered. The pyramids were anchors, not puzzles. And yet here we are, still staring, still guessing, still filming documentaries with dramatic music. Because deep down we want mystery. We want something bigger than us, older than us, unfinished. And the pyramids give us that, even when the answer is simple. They were built by humans who believed death wasn't the end. They were shaped by faith, fear, pride, and logistics. They were maintained by ritual, memory, and repetition. They worked. That's the quietest truth of all. The pyramids didn't fail. They didn't crumble. They didn't get forgotten. They're still doing their job. Holding attention. Holding memory. Holding time and place. So tonight, as you drift off, remember that somewhere, under layers of stone and sand, a king once believed this structure would keep him alive forever. And in a way, did. That's where we'll stop. No mystery revealed. No secret switch flipped. Just humans, stone, and the very old desire not to disappear. Sleep well. Part 6. The long goodbye. Stone that outlives us all. Alright, welcome back one last time. This is the extra drift. The part where nothing new really happens. And that's kind of the point. Because the pyramids don't end. They just continue. By now we've walked around them. We've gone inside them. We've followed their beliefs upward to the stars and downward into hidden valleys. And after all that effort, all that stone, all that certainty, they're still just there, quiet. What's strange is how normal they eventually became. Ancient Egyptians lived their entire lives with pyramids in the background. They weren't mysterious to them. They were landmarks, like mountains or rivers. Children grew up seeing them. Farmers passed them. Priests ignored them unless ritual demanded otherwise. The pyramids weren't magical. They were familiar. And maybe that's the most unsettling thing of all. Over centuries, dynasties collapsed. Foreign rulers arrived. Languages changed. And still the pyramids stayed. They outlasted the gods they were built for. That wasn't the plan. But stone doesn't care about theology. When Christianity spread through Egypt, the pyramids didn't object. When Islam arrived, they remained silent. When Napoleon showed up with cannons and notebooks, they watched. Empires come and go. The pyramids don't react. Modern tourists walk around them with phones raised, trying to capture something that refuses to fit into a frame. Photos don't help. Videos don't help. You have to be there to feel how uninterested they are in you. And maybe that's the final lesson. The pyramids weren't built for us. They weren't built to impress the future. They weren't built to explain themselves. They were built for a single purpose. In a single moment. By people who thought eternity was manageable. They were wrong about many things. But they were right about one. Few build slowly, carefully, and without needing applause. You can last. So as this story fades out, nothing collapses. No revelation arrives. No secret door opens. The pyramids simply continue doing what they've always done. Standing still, holding memory, and waiting for us to finish talking. That's where we'll leave it tonight. No cliffhanger. No mystery solved. Stone. Time. Moving very, very slowly. Sleep well. Next part. Part 7. After the tourists leave. What happens when nothing needs us anymore? Right. If you're still here, this is the part that barely exists. The unofficial ending. The slow fade after the credits. Because the pyramids don't really have a final chapter. They just wait. Imagine Giza at night. Not the postcard version. Not the drone footage. The real one. The buses are gone. The vendors are quiet. The guards are bored. And the pyramids are exactly the same as they were 12 hours ago. Exactly the same as they were 2,000 years ago. They don't reset. They don't rest. They just remain. Ancient Egyptians never imagined this moment. They assumed rituals would continue forever. That priests would chant. That names would be spoken daily. They didn't plan for abandonment. Stone lasts longer than culture. That's the uncomfortable truth the pyramids reveal. At some point the rituals stopped. The offerings stopped. The gods faded. And the pyramids didn't notice. They weren't powered by belief. They were powered by mass. Which makes them brutally honest monuments. Even now they sit on the edge of a modern city. Traffic noise. Cell towers. Fast food signs. And there they are. Older than writing. Older than money. Older than almost every idea we take seriously. Still not impressed. People still ask what else they might be hiding. Secret chamber. Final message. Some buried revelation. But here's the quiet truth. If the pyramids had something to say, they already said it. They said, build carefully, think long, accept that you will be forgotten anyway. And then they stop talking. So if your mind drifts now, if thoughts blur and soften, that's perfect, because the pyramids don't demand attention. They outlast it. And somewhere, beneath layers of stone and silence, a long-dead king is still waiting, not for visitors, not for discovery, just for the universe to keep behaving. And so far as that's truly the end, nothing else happens. Nothing needs to. Part 8. When the story stops trying, sand, stars, and the comfort of not knowing. Alright. This really is the last drift. The part where the voice gets quieter, the sentences get softer, and the story mostly dissolves into atmosphere. Because eventually, even history gets tired of explaining itself. Picture the plateau again. Not just the pyramids but everything around them. The sand shifting slowly. The wind doing its repetitive work. The distant lights of Cairo blinking on and off like a restless constellation. And there, still anchored between desert and city, is Giza Plateau. No ceremony. No audience. Just presence. The pyramids don't react to attention. They don't reward curiosity. Millions of people have tried to decode them, measure them, reinterpret them. They've been mapped, simulated, and every time the result is the same. Tone, belief. Nothing hidden behind the curtain. Even the Nile, patient and ancient, has changed course over the centuries. But Nile River still flows. Still floods even if controlled now. Still defines the land. The pyramids watched all of it. They watched kingdoms rise along its banks. They watched them fade. They didn't intervene. What's funny, quietly funny, is that the pyramids were never meant to be mysterious. Mystery is what happens when context dies. When the rituals stop. When the language fades. When belief loses its audience. Mystery isn't intentional. It's accidental. The ancient builders assumed their world would continue. That someone would always know why these stones were here. They didn't plan for amnesia. And yet, here we are. There's something oddly comforting in that. The idea that not everything needs interpretation. That some things can just exist without explanation. The pyramids don't ask us to understand them. They don't care if we do. So if your thoughts are slowing now, if images blur into sand and sky, that's fine. That's exactly where this story ends. Not with an answer. Not with a revelation. But with stillness. The pyramids remain. The world changes. And we, eventually, drift off. That's it. Nothing more is coming. Good night. Next part. Part 9. The quiet after everything. When even stone stops trying. If you're still listening, this is the part that barely counts as history anymore. This is the exhale. Because at some point even the pyramids stop being a topic. And turn into background noise. Think about how often they've been repurposed in the human imagination. Sacred tombs. Ancient riddles. Engineering flexes. Spiritual symbols. Tourist backdrops. They've been everything except what they originally were. And that's fine. Stone doesn't mind being misunderstood. At night, the lights of Cairo glow nearby. Cars move. People argue. Someone's phone vibrates with something urgent that won't matter tomorrow. And the pyramids don't respond. They don't compete. They don't adapt. They just continue being heavier than time. The ancient builders believed these structures would guarantee eternity. They didn't mean global fame. They meant stability. They meant the sun would rise. The river would flow. The universe would stay predictable. And for thousands of years, it mostly did. That's the strange comfort of the pyramids. They aren't hopeful. They aren't optimistic. They're resigned. They accept that everything passes. Accept mass, shape, and patience. So if your thoughts feel slow now, if the images are fading into sand-colored quiet, that's perfect. There's nothing left to explain. The pyramids don't need defending. They don't need decoding. They don't need a final theory. They've already outlasted the conversation. And with that, the story doesn't end. Simply stops being told. Sleep well. Next part. Part 10. Where time gives up, sand, silence, and the soft weight of forever. Alright. This is truly the part where nothing happens. The voice slows. The words stretch out. And history quietly steps off the stage. Because at some point even long stories have to lie down. The desert settles into its night routine. The Sahara Desert exhales heat it stored all day. The air cools. The sand shifts by a few grains, as it has for thousands of years. And the pyramids don't notice. They don't register temperature. They don't feel night. They don't care if anyone is watching. They are not awake. They are not asleep. They are just present. Look up gently without moving your head. The stars come out one by one. Not all at once. They never rush. Somewhere above, the Milky Way stretches faintly across the sky. The same way it did when the first limestone blocks were set into place. The same stars. Different people. Always different people. Ancient Egyptians believed the king would join those stars. Become fixed. Become permanent. They underestimated the stars. Stars die too. Stone. Stone just erodes slowly enough that it feels eternal. The pyramids have watched belief systems come and go like seasonal floods. Gods renamed. Gods replaced. Gods forgotten. The structures never protested. They never corrected anyone. They were built for one idea. And then politely survived everything else. That's the part that's hardest to sit with. The pyramids don't validate us. They don't care if we understand them correctly. They don't reward curiosity with closure. They just exist long enough for meaning to become optional. So if your thoughts are thin now, if sentences are starting to blur, if the voice feels farther away, that's right where this belongs. This isn't a mystery story anymore. It's a landscape. Somewhere, a stone rests exactly where it was placed 4,000 years ago. No one remembers the hands that set it there. No one knows their name. No one needs to. The stone doesn't miss them. And eventually, will fade too. The pyramids won't notice that either. That's the last thing. No moral. No twist. No answer waiting in the dark. Just wait. Time. Moving slower than thought. Good night. Part 11. The world keeps moving and the stone does not. Right. This is the part where even the idea of a part feels unnecessary. The voice is low. Pace is slow. Nothing is being introduced anymore. We're just letting time pass. Morning comes to the desert whether anyone asks for it or not. Light creeps across the sand. Shadows shorten. The edges of stone soften. And there they are again. Exactly where they were. The pyramids don't wake up. They don't stretch. They don't care that another day has started. Days are a human invention. At some point, people stopped counting how many sunrises these stones have seen. The number got too large. Too abstract. Thousands blur together. Centuries flatten out. Time loses its texture around things that don't age the way we do. Empires once arranged themselves around these structures. Taxes were collected. Laws were spoken. Orders were shouted. Then the empires left. Not dramatically. Just gradually. Stone doesn't record that kind of exit. Later generations reused the pyramids without asking permission. Stones were taken for other buildings. Corners chipped away. Surfaces stripped. And still, the shapes remained. Damaged, yes. Reduced, sure. But present. There's something quietly humbling about that. Not inspiring. Not motivational. Just humbling. The pyramids don't suggest greatness is eternal. They suggest effort can linger longer than intention. Think about the people who built them. Not the kings. The workers. People who woke up sore. People who carried stone all day. People who joked, complained, and went home tired. They didn't know their work would outlast entire civilizations. They were just doing a job. And now, that job still exists. Modern humans arrive with explanations ready. Engineering theories. Cultural analysis. Laser scans. All valid. All useful. And none of it changes the stones. The pyramids don't improve with understanding. They don't become more meaningful when decoded. They were complete the moment the last block settled. Everything after that is commentary. So if your thoughts feel thinner now, if the story feels like it's dissolving, that's not a problem. That's the natural state of things. The pyramids aren't waiting for us to finish talking. They've already moved on. Or rather, they never went anywhere. And with that, we don't end. We just stop adding words. Sleep comes next. Part 12. After the words run out. Sand doing what sand does. Right. This is the part where the narration barely holds together. Not because anything is missing, but because nothing else needs to be added. History has already said what it's going to say. Somewhere on the Giza Plateau, the wind moves again. Not dramatically. Just enough to rearrange the surface. A soft brushing sound that no one records. Sand is very busy. It's always undoing and redoing the same small work. Covering. Uncovering. Repeating itself patiently. The pyramids don't fight this. They don't resist erosion. They don't defend their edges. They accept the slow rounding of corners the way old things do. With indifference. At some point in the future. Not soon, not dramatically. The world will look different again. Cities will shift. Rivers will move. Languages will change shape. And the pyramids will still be there. Slightly smaller. Slightly softer. But unmistakable. Ancient Egyptians believed names had power. As long as a name was spoken, the soul lived. Most of those names are gone now. The kings. Priests. The architects. And yet, the shapes remain. which suggests something uncomfortable. Maybe permanence doesn't need identity. Maybe mass is enough. Think about how rarely we allow ourselves to sit with that idea. That effort can outlive intention. That meaning fades faster than structure. That legacy is often accidental. The pyramids don't argue this point. They demonstrate it. People still arrive every day. A point. They photograph. They speculate. They leave. And the pyramids absorb none of it. They don't collect reactions. They don't store admiration. They're not impressed by attention. If this feels repetitive now, but repetition is the natural rhythm of things that last. The sun rises, the sand shifts, the stone stays, and somewhere beneath all of it, beneath layers of weather and forgetting, there's still the simplest truth of all. These were built by humans, for human fears, using human patience. Nothing more, nothing less. So if the voice feels distant now, if the words feel thinner, that's not the story ending. That's the listener drifting. Which is exactly how this was meant to go. No more explanations. The stone, the sin, time, doing what they've always done. Good night. Part 13. The very long pause, when even time stops checking in. Right. This is the part that almost doesn't exist. The space between words. The silence that follows a thought and doesn't bother replacing it. If you're half asleep now, that's perfect. If you're fully asleep, even better. Nothing important happens here. Somewhere, far from attention, the night air cools the stone again. Not enough to matter. Just enough to register on instruments no one is watching. The pyramids don't record it. They don't respond. They've been cooling and warming for thousands of years. It's just another cycle they don't need to remember. At this point in the story, humans usually want closure. Takeaway. Lesson. A final sentence that explains why all of this mattered. The pyramids never offered one. They weren't built to teach. They weren't built to inspire. They were built to persist. Everything else is optional. Think about how rarely we encounter things that don't want something from us. No engagement, no belief, no interpretation, just presence. That's why the pyramids feel heavy in a way stone shouldn't. They don't negotiate. The ancient world faded around them. Not all at once. Not dramatically. Just slowly. One ritual forgotten. One temple abandoned. One name no longer spoken. And the pyramids stayed. Not because they were sacred. Because they were stubborn. If your thoughts feel slow now, if the voice sounds like it's coming from far away, that's not boredom. That's your brain realizing there's nothing left to solve. The pyramids don't reward understanding. They don't change when decoded. They don't glow with meaning once explained. They were complete before anyone asked questions. So this is where we stop pretending there's more. No secret chamber. No final theory. No last reveal. Just the quiet confidence of something that doesn't need an ending. Somewhere, a block of limestone rests exactly where it has rested for centuries. No one checks on it. No one needs to. It's doing fine. And now, there's nothing else to add. The voice fades. The words thin out. The pyramids remain. And you, very gently, don't have to anymore. Good night.